Emily Carter arrived in New Orleans at dusk, gazing at the city through the taxi window. There was something profoundly enigmatic about the warm, humid air, the historic architecture, and the sound of jazz flowing through the streets, as if the city held secrets beneath every shadow. Since her traumatic divorce, Emily had felt adrift, and the decision to move here was a desperate attempt to start over. New Orleans seemed to offer a new identity, a place where she could reinvent herself away from familiar eyes. As the taxi glided down the streets, Emily took a deep breath, hoping the city would offer her peace. The apartment she rented was in an old building with wrought iron balconies and a wooden staircase that creaked with every step. Laden with luggage and emotions that still weighed heavily, Emily climbed the stairs with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. The city represented a fresh chance, and she was determined to build a different life, free from the shadows of her relationship with Jack. The apartment was small but cozy, and when she opened the window, she caught the city's scent, a blend of spices, tobacco, and something she couldn't quite identify. New Orleans seemed ready to envelop her in its mystery. On her first night, she explored the neighborhood, absorbing the dim lights and the aromas of local kitchens. When she met Jane Wilson, her neighbor, Jane had an old-fashioned charm, with blonde hair and piercing eyes, and she offered to show Emily around. Hesitant at first, Emily eventually accepted her company. They spent hours in a rustic cafe, listening to Jane's stories, which seemed to spring from the city's own imagination. Jane spoke of mysticism and secrets as though they were everyday occurrences, and though intrigued, Emily felt a vague unease that she chose to ignore, dismissing it as a fleeting curiosity. By the end of their outing, Emily felt she had found an ally. Back in her apartment, she drew the curtains and prepared for sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop questioning whether New Orleans would truly be the refuge she imagined. The conversation with Jane had stirred something in her memory, a subtle discomfort. Perhaps it was just the shock of the move, but as she closed her eyes, the image of Jack surfaced in her mind. For a brief moment, the feeling of peace gave way to fear, reminding her of the emotional scars he had left. She needed to bury the past and focus on rebuilding herself. The next morning, Emily woke up with renewed determination. She got ready to head out, but when she opened the door, she found a note pinned to the doorframe. Written in delicate handwriting, the words sent a chill through her. "Welcome to New Orleans. Be careful what you look for." The message both intrigued and unsettled her, but she decided to ignore it, assuming it was just a local prank. She glanced down the empty staircase, sensing the presence of something unknown. Yet, as she shut the door and began her day, the feeling that something was about to happen lingered, refusing to leave her in peace. Determined to take her life in a new direction, Emily spent the next morning handing out resumes. She walked through New Orleans' charming, history-filled streets, looking for work at offices and cafes. By late afternoon, she found an opening for an administrative assistant position at a prestigious law firm downtown. Excited, she submitted her resume and waited in the reception area, feeling an unusual energy in the place, a strange tension in the air. In a moment of distraction, Emily looked up and saw a man watching her from afar. He had an elegant bearing, deep eyes, and exuded a disturbing yet magnetic presence. She recognized the name as he passed by: Lucas Montgomery, senior partner. The connection between them was immediate and unsettling. Lucas looked directly at her with a silent intensity that left her flustered, as if he could see beyond what was in front of him. Moments later, he walked over to the reception desk and extended his hand with a slight, enigmatic smile. "Emily Carter, right? I see you've applied for the position. Welcome to the firm." His voice was firm yet soft, almost like an invitation, and Emily felt her body respond with a mix of nerves and curiosity. His words, however, seemed like a warning. Something about him stirred more than just simple attraction. In the following days, Emily started settling into the job, yet she noticed that Lucas always seemed to be nearby, watching in a subtle way. His glances and smiles intrigued her, as if he knew more than she did about the past she was trying to leave behind. During one of the meetings, he hinted that the city had much to offer and invited her to an event at one of the historic mansions. Hesitant, yet aware that this connection could help her in her new life, she accepted. However, Lucas's constant presence was breeding a growing sense of distrust, as if he knew something she didn't about why she had come to New Orleans. The event took place on a humid night at the luxurious mansion of an influential client of the firm. The evening began calmly, but as the night progressed, Emily noticed that Lucas seemed to know nearly everyone there, local figures of power and influence. He moved about with a mysterious ease, yet something was bothering him. He kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone or fearing a presence. At one point, he approached Emily, leaning in close to her, and whispered, "New Orleans is not what it seems, Emily. There are layers here that must be respected." The warning left her puzzled, but she could tell he was serious. By the end of the night, Emily felt increasingly drawn to and disturbed by Lucas, as if he were a key to the city's hidden mysteries. Heading back home, his words echoed in her mind, and she pondered over what he could have meant. It was clear that he played a larger role than just that of a powerful lawyer. Lucas held deep secrets that seemed to whisper through the streets of New Orleans, wrapped in an ancient mist that Emily was only beginning to see with her own eyes. As she closed the door to her apartment, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. She looked back, but everything seemed too quiet to be real. Emily woke up in the middle of the night, her heart racing, the room shrouded in darkness. She had dreamed of her ex-husband, Jack, but his face was veiled in shadows. The city seemed to be affecting her senses, reviving memories she desperately wanted to bury. Unable to sleep, she decided to take a walk to clear her mind. As she wandered through the quiet streets, she noticed a man in the distance who appeared to be following her. With each step, Emily's fear intensified, and when she turned quickly to look, the man had vanished. Standing there, on the empty sidewalk, she felt exposed, as if ghosts from her past had returned to haunt her. The days at the office weren't helping either. Lucas seemed to always be watching her with a blend of interest and caution, which only fueled her suspicion and curiosity. One afternoon, while organizing documents in the file room, she came across a folder labeled Jack Carter, her ex-husband. The shock immobilized her for a moment. She hesitated but opened the folder, which contained old documents from a fraud case. Lucas entered the room silently, catching her off guard, and asked why she looked so troubled. Emily tried to cover it up, but she knew he'd sensed something. Later, as she reviewed the information, Lucas approached her with a concerned expression. "Emily, your past goes deeper than you realize. Jack's history with New Orleans isn't a coincidence." She stared at him, incredulous, asking what he knew. He hesitated but claimed that Jack had dark connections with prominent figures in the city, and that their divorce might have been just a piece of a much larger scheme. "You came here to escape, but perhaps what you're looking for is directly tied to what you left behind." The revelation was shocking, and Emily realized that her past was chasing her down. In the following days, the city began to feel increasingly claustrophobic. The streets that once held mystery now felt menacing, and every corner brought forth a new, repressed memory. Emily started feeling a sense of paranoia, a growing feeling that Jack might be closer than she thought. Lucas, ever more involved, tried to reassure her, but something in his expression suggested that he knew much more. The revelation stirred within her a desire to understand her true purpose for being in New Orleans and why Lucas seemed to always be near. That night, upon returning to her apartment, Emily found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a photo of her and Jack, torn down the middle, with a message written on the back. "You will never escape." Emily trembled as she read those words. The message was clear, and the past she had tried so hard to leave behind seemed to be everywhere. Lucas was right. What she sought and what she had left behind were strangely intertwined. This was only the beginning of a series of disturbing revelations. Disturbed by the threatening photo, Emily tried to seek support from Jane, the only person she could trust outside of work. However, Jane began acting strangely, avoiding their meetings and always seeming busy. When she finally agreed to see her, Emily found her visibly shaken, muttering about family issues. But as they talked, Jane revealed she had been threatened by powerful figures in the city, pleading with Emily not to get involved. Emily felt torn between loyalty to her friend and her growing curiosity about what was really happening. That night, Jane showed up unexpectedly at Emily's apartment, holding an envelope she said was very important. With trembling hands, she asked Emily to keep it safe and only open it in case of an emergency. "I trust you, Emily. Just take care of all this if I can't." Emily promised to help, but she sensed that Jane was hiding something more, as if afraid Emily might ask the wrong questions. After Jane left, Emily was overcome with a deep feeling that her friend was in imminent danger. The next morning, while having coffee, she noticed a man watching her building in a suspicious manner. He wore a dark suit and seemed to be waiting for something or someone. When Emily left for work, she saw that the man was following her at a distance. Determined to confront him, she tried to approach, but he quickly vanished. The situation was becoming more dangerous than she'd anticipated, and Emily began questioning whether she should open Jane's envelope. At work, Lucas noticed her unease and, upon confronting her, she briefly mentioned the threats against Jane. He advised her not to interfere, warning that New Orleans was like a web, and getting further involved could be dangerous. However, Emily felt she couldn't abandon Jane, and her conversation with Lucas only intensified her suspicions about him. She decided to investigate Jack's past on her own and uncover the true reason for being here. Returning to her apartment, she saw that Jane had left a cryptic message on her phone. "Trust no one. The city is more dangerous than you think." A chill ran down Emily's spine. Jane's words echoed in her mind, and now it felt as though the city was trapping her in a game far bigger than she had ever imagined. The growing paranoia and Jane's cryptic messages began to consume Emily's thoughts. That night, when Lucas invited her to a gala dinner, she decided to go, hoping the event might help her uncover more about him and the secrets of New Orleans. Upon arriving, Emily felt a palpable tension in the air. People were watching her with an invasive curiosity, and Lucas behaved protectively, as if he feared something. She quickly realized the city was far more entwined with powerful figures than she had ever imagined. Throughout the evening, Emily crossed paths with several influential people, including a middle-aged man with whom Lucas seemed to be having a discreet and tense conversation. As she discreetly approached, she overheard something about Jane and an old debt that needed to be settled. Sensing danger, Emily pulled back, but the discomfort stayed with her for the rest of the event. Lucas, noticing her tension, merely smiled, saying the city had many secrets. It was as if he were testing her patience. Later, Lucas insisted on driving her home. On the way, as he spoke about the allure the city held for him, Emily noticed the quiet control he seemed to exert over everyone around him. His influence seemed to reach every corner and every shadow. Emily felt that Lucas harbored an even greater secret and that Jane was only the tip of an iceberg he was quietly maneuvering. This realization made her even more suspicious of Lucas's motives in drawing so close to her. Back at her apartment, Emily decided to open the envelope Jane had given her. Inside, she found a series of financial documents and photographs of political and business figures from the city, including one of Jack and Lucas together. The revelation was devastating. Jack and Lucas were part of something much bigger, a scheme that now directly involved her. Feeling deceived and increasingly in danger, Emily realized she would have to face the truth, even if it cost her peace. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The images of the documents and Lucas's face in one of the photos made it clear there was no easy way out. New Orleans, with all its beauty and mystery, was revealing itself as a dangerous city, where each secret uncovered seemed to pull her further into darkness. The discovery of documents linking Jack to Lucas deeply unsettled Emily, who now grew suspicious of every look and word exchanged at work. The next morning, Lucas called her into a private meeting. He approached her with a darker demeanor, warning her that powerful people might turn against her if they learned how much she already knew. New Orleans isn't for the faint-hearted, he said with a chilling calm before leaving. His words echoed like a veiled threat, but Emily didn't know whether she should fear Jack more or Lucas himself. In her apartment, Emily reviewed each document from the envelope Jane had left. She couldn't believe her ex-husband was involved in a web of corruption and fraud in New Orleans, much less that Lucas was connected to him. A chill ran down her spine as she realized she might be a pawn, manipulated by both Lucas and Jack in some sort of game. If they had followed her there, it was because her presence served a purpose for them, though she still didn't know what. Emily knew she needed to dig deeper, no matter how dangerous it might be. As the days passed, Jane's messages continued to arrive, with increasingly alarming phrases mentioning hidden dangers and people who should be avoided at all costs. Jane was visibly cornered, and Emily sensed that she knew more than she was revealing. However, attempts to contact her went unanswered, heightening Emily's fear that something serious was happening. Each message from Jane felt like a call to action, but Emily didn't know whom she could truly trust. In an attempt to seek help, Emily reached out to Ethan, a former colleague who now lived in New Orleans and had experience in corporate fraud investigations. During a quick meeting at a cafe, she showed him the documents and photos of Jack and Lucas together. Ethan was intrigued and agreed to look into Lucas's financial background and Jack's shady dealings, promising Emily he would be discreet and fast. This alliance brought her a sense of relief, as she finally felt she had someone trustworthy on her side. That night, Emily returned home with a mix of relief and fear. She knew she had to stay vigilant, and each step she took felt riskier. On her way back, while walking down a dimly lit street, she thought she saw a shadow following her. As she quickened her pace, the shadow vanished, but the fear lingered. The city was brimming with secrets, and every corner seemed to conceal something dark that Emily was only beginning to comprehend. Days later, Emily received news that left her completely stunned. Jack had been seen in the city. A mutual friend had casually mentioned spotting him at a restaurant in the French Quarter. The information shook her deeply. If he was in New Orleans, it meant his plans went far beyond what she could have imagined. Emily's heart raced, and every detail from the past surfaced, from his manipulations to the control he once had over her. Gradually, she began to feel surrounded. She knew Jack was manipulative and had the skills to lead a double life without anyone knowing. Trying to stay calm, Emily combed through the documents again, searching for any clue that might explain his intentions in the city. A disturbing thought crept in. What if he was there to monitor her, ensuring she didn't uncover something crucial? The idea left her uneasy, and Emily realized she would need to act quickly if she wanted answers. With Ethan's support, Emily started tracking possible locations where Jack might be hiding. They knew Jack had allies in high society, but they had to be cautious not to raise any suspicions. While reviewing some financial transactions, they found transfers linked to a mansion on the city outskirts, a property Jack could be using as a base. With this new lead, Emily and Ethan devised a plan to infiltrate the place discreetly. On a stormy night, Emily and Ethan drove to the mansion, planning to observe any activity and verify if Jack was really there. As they waited in the car, they saw a man exiting through the side door. The silhouette was unmistakable. It was Jack, walking with his usual confidence. Emily's heart raced as she saw him so close. She knew it could be a trap, but she was determined to find out why he had brought her there. Back at her apartment, Emily felt increasingly apprehensive. She knew that if she confronted Jack, she needed to be prepared for the consequences. As she reviewed the information, she realized that Lucas might know more about Jack than he was letting on. It was clear that a reunion with Jack was inevitable, but Emily needed all the answers before facing the man who had destroyed her life. Lucas began acting even more protective, almost possessive. He would appear at the most unexpected moments, suggesting meetups and insisting she take care of herself. Although part of her wanted to trust him, every word Lucas said seemed to mask a bigger secret, and Emily knew he was hiding something. One afternoon, she decided to subtly confront him about Jack, casually mentioning his name and watching Lucas's reaction. He hesitated, confirming to her that he knew much more than he was willing to admit. Later, while reviewing some office files, Emily found a folder labeled with Jane's name, containing documents that mentioned suspicious transactions. She realized Jane had been part of something bigger and that her help might have put her own safety at risk. The records showed a significant flow of money involving important figures and clandestine meeting spots. Emily sensed that, as much as Jane wanted to help her, she was also in danger. The city was unraveling into a web of lies that entangled almost everyone around her. As Emily investigated, she received a call from Jane, sounding more desperate than ever. Jane said she was on the run and had become more deeply involved than she'd anticipated. "They're watching me, Emily. I can't protect you anymore. Be careful," she whispered before hanging up, leaving Emily even more terrified. The fear in Jane's voice was unmistakable, and the feeling of insecurity grew with each passing minute. After the call, Emily realized her phone was tapped, and she was probably being monitored. She immediately contacted Ethan to plan their next move, sensing that time was running out. They decided that, to protect themselves, they would need to leave the city and expose the entire scheme. Ethan, who had uncovered more information about Jack and Lucas, suggested they head to a neighboring city to organize their evidence and strategize a way to confront the situation. At the end of the day, when Emily returned home, she found her apartment ransacked. Someone had broken in and left a clear warning. A note with the message, "Stop investigating or face the consequences." Her hands trembled as she held it, but she felt there was no turning back now. She was at the center of a dangerous game, and with each uncovered secret, her resolve to see it through only grew stronger. Determined to protect herself and gather evidence against Jack and Lucas, Emily and Ethan made plans to temporarily leave the city. They knew that as time passed, the danger would only grow, and Emily feared that someone close to her might get hurt. Before leaving, she made one last visit to the office, where she found Lucas waiting for her, his expression serious and his gaze cold. He seemed to suspect that she knew too much and, with an incisive tone, asked if she had anything to say. Emily felt cornered but managed to play it off, claiming she needed some time away from the office. Lucas seemed surprised but reluctantly let her go. As she walked out, she noticed him watching her with a look that combined anger and suspicion, as if he knew she was planning to flee. However, as she turned the corner, Emily felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from an unknown number. "Trust no one. We are always watching." As she drove out of the city with Ethan, the silence in the car was almost suffocating. They both knew they were dealing with an organization that wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threat. Passing a roadside cafe, Ethan pulled over and suggested they discuss their next steps. He proposed gathering all their information into a dossier and handing it over to a trusted contact in the press, someone who could expose the entire network without putting their lives at immediate risk. During the conversation, Emily began to realize that Jack might be seeking revenge, manipulating Lucas against her. Every detail made more sense, and she understood that New Orleans was more than a new home. It was a battleground. Ethan, in turn, assured her that he would stand by her side, even if things became even more dangerous. He knew how much Emily had endured and was willing to protect her. However, as soon as they returned to the car, they realized they were being followed. They tried to lose the vehicle tailing them, but the fear of being caught made them speed down the road, nearly losing control. The sense of danger was palpable, and Emily knew it was now a matter of life and death. Their only chance was to fight with everything they had against the shadows surrounding them. Emily and Ethan finally reached the neighboring city, finding shelter in a secluded hotel. There, they organized all the evidence they had gathered: documents, photos, messages. They knew every detail would be crucial to exposing Jack, Lucas, and everyone involved. Emily felt more determined than ever, but at the same time, worry for Jane and uncertainty about the future left her anxious. She knew that if they didn't act soon, they'd lose the chance to unmask the truth. As they cataloged the evidence, Emily received a new message from Lucas: "You shouldn't have run. This only makes things worse for you." She realized at that moment that he was onto their plan. Emily's heart tightened, and Ethan suggested they relocate again. But before they could leave, the phone rang. It was Jane, panicked, saying she was on the run, and that the secrets she knew were even deeper than she had imagined. "Don't let them find you, Emily. Don't let them," she repeated, crying, before hanging up. Jane's message increased the urgency for Emily and Ethan to release everything. In one final attempt, they contacted the journalist they knew and arranged a meeting for the next day. They felt hunted, but public exposure would be their only protection against Lucas and Jack's revenge. The dossier they compiled was filled with undeniable evidence, and the journalist promised everything would be broadcast nationwide. That night, as they prepared for the next day, Emily reflected on how much her life had changed. She felt exhausted but ready to face whatever lay ahead, even if it meant a final confrontation with Jack and Lucas. With Ethan by her side, she was prepared to expose every secret and reclaim her life. The only question was whether they would emerge unscathed from this last move. Dawn would bring not just a new day but a new chance for justice. The morning of the meeting with the journalist arrived, and Emily and Ethan woke before sunrise, preparing the evidence and reviewing the dossier. Nervous, they hoped the meeting would go smoothly, but feared that Lucas and Jack might be closer than they realized. When they arrived at the agreed-upon location, a discreet cafe, journalist Rick Thompson awaited them with a serious expression, fully aware of the risks this story carried. The atmosphere was heavy, and Ethan made it clear they needed to release everything at once. During the meeting, Emily handed over the documents and shared details about her marriage to Jack, exposing his manipulations and his involvement with corrupt figures in New Orleans. Rick listened carefully and assured them that the evidence would be published cautiously, but on a national scale, which would protect Emily and Ethan from Jack and Lucas's threats. However, midway through the conversation, Rick's phone rang. He answered and quickly stepped outside, looking alarmed. When he returned, his face was grim. "I just got a threatening message. They know about this meeting, and if I publish this story, I'll be signing my own death sentence," Rick whispered. Emily and Ethan exchanged looks, their fear turning into panic. They knew Jack and Lucas were monitoring their every move, and though Rick seemed shaken, he was still willing to proceed with the plan. With the agreement in place, they arranged to meet again that evening to finalize the details. Back at the hotel, Emily felt a heaviness in her heart. The pursuit seemed endless, and she knew Lucas was determined to destroy her. There was only the hope that their plan would be faster than Jack's moves. However, as she reviewed the evidence, Emily uncovered a note revealing an even stronger connection between Lucas and Jack. Both were involved in a blackmail and money laundering scheme linked to city politicians. The network was more intricate than they had imagined, and they were on the edge of something far bigger. Rick's last message confirmed Emily's worst fears. The story would be published, but doing so would likely put her and everyone around her in immediate danger. With fear becoming more real by the minute, she began to wonder how much time they had left before Lucas and Jack tried to silence them for good. At nightfall, Emily and Ethan went to the location arranged to meet Rick and hand over the remaining documents. But upon arrival, they sensed something was wrong. The cafe was deserted, the lights off. When they tried calling Rick, his phone went straight to voicemail. Ethan suggested they wait a few minutes, but after looking around more closely, they noticed suspicious movement outside. A group of men approached, dressed inconspicuously but clearly watching them. Realizing they were walking into an ambush, Emily and Ethan exited through the back door and sprinted through the city, ducking into narrow, dark alleys to evade their pursuers. Emily's heart raced, feeling that any second they could be caught. Keeping calm, Ethan led her through back streets and passageways until they found a small hotel where they could hide. In the hotel room, while catching their breath, Ethan revealed something he had kept to himself since his last investigation. He had discovered that Jack had paid Lucas to use Emily and keep her under control, fearing she might uncover his financial secrets. The revelation devastated her. Lucas had never intended to protect her but to manipulate her, trapping her in a vicious cycle of fear and mistrust. Determined to escape this nightmare, Emily proposed taking the evidence directly to the police, but Ethan reminded her that some members of the local force were involved in the corruption scheme. They needed a safer strategy. Both decided to regroup with Rick in a nearby city, where he had promised the help of a journalist colleague. As they rested, Emily reflected on the losses and lies that weighed on her. She no longer wanted to be a victim of Jack or Lucas's manipulation, and Ethan seemed to be the only person she could trust. She knew this was the point of no return, and the decision she made next would determine her fate and that of many others. The next day, Rick sent a message with coordinates for a new meeting, this time in an abandoned commercial building. Though risky, he assured them it was the only place they could talk without being monitored. Emily and Ethan arrived with hearts full of uncertainty. Entering the building, they saw Rick looking nervous, glancing around as if he expected a threat at any moment. During the meeting, Rick revealed that part of the documents they'd given him included evidence of blackmail against high-ranking government officials. He explained that Jack and Lucas were involved in activities far beyond corruption. Their goal was to influence political decisions, ensuring their power was never questioned. The scope of the scheme was terrifying, and Emily felt the weight of the danger increase. They were up against a power network willing to do anything to protect its secrets. But before they could discuss their next move, gunshots rang out outside the building. They all instinctively ducked, and Ethan quickly led Emily to a side exit. The fear was intense, and the sound of footsteps from their pursuers grew closer. In a brave act, Rick stayed behind to distract the men, giving Emily and Ethan time to escape. Running down the dark street, they hurried toward the car. Ethan glanced back, realizing Rick probably wouldn't make it out of the ambush unscathed. Guilt gnawed at Emily, knowing that her actions were putting innocent people in danger. She realized that they could no longer rely on physical meetings. Their only option now was to send the evidence digitally. After escaping, Emily and Ethan reached a new hiding place and spent the night wide awake, discussing their latest discoveries and trying to guess how far Jack and Lucas would go. It was clear they were in a life-or-death struggle, and the chances of getting out alive were dwindling with each passing moment. In the days that followed, Emily and Ethan decided they needed outside help and a secure way to reveal everything they knew. They reached out to a mutual friend of Ethan's, a hacker named Leo, who could help them make the evidence public without Jack or Lucas tracking them. Leo, a digital security expert, proposed setting up a secure website where they could publish the evidence, making it accessible to journalists and activists across the country. With Leo's support, they spent days digitizing documents, recording statements, and organizing the evidence to make the release as impactful as possible. The idea of publicly exposing Jack and Lucas's schemes gave Emily a sense of power she hadn't felt in a long time. With each new document, the web of corruption became clearer, with faces and names of those involved filling pages upon pages of lies and manipulation. Leo worked tirelessly to ensure that the information was secure and that once published, it couldn't be taken down. He explained to Emily and Ethan that the release would need to be synchronized with multiple media outlets to ensure the scheme was exposed on a large scale. They knew this was their only chance and that any mistake could be fatal. On the night before the publication, Emily was torn between fear and hope. She knew that by exposing Jack and Lucas, she could bring justice to many victims and finally gain the emotional closure she'd been seeking. With Ethan by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came, determined to see this through to the end. However, as they reviewed the digital content one last time, Emily's phone rang. It was a message from Jack. "I know what you're doing. This won't end well for you." Her hands trembled, but she knew there was no turning back. It was time to end this once and for all. On the morning of the release, Emily, Ethan, and Leo were ready to launch the site. The plan involved alerting various journalists simultaneously, ensuring the public would have access to the entire network of corruption, blackmail, and financial manipulation. Emily was nervous, aware that this move would define the rest of her life. But the sense of justice and freedom she felt outweighed her fear. At noon, Leo activated the site and shared the link with renowned journalists, instructing them to spread the content widely. The response was immediate. News of the downfall of one of New Orleans' largest corruption networks flooded the headlines, with Jack, Lucas, and other associates' names appearing on lists of suspects under investigation. The public reaction was explosive, and Emily felt a wave of relief seeing her plan in action. Lucas tried contacting Emily multiple times, but she ignored all his calls. She knew he was cornered and would now be focused on saving himself. Ethan, at her side, suggested they relocate somewhere even safer until the investigations wrapped up. However, Emily refused to flee. After so much time, she was ready to face the consequences and confront her enemies head-on. In the following days, the investigations into Jack and Lucas took on unexpected proportions. Both were placed under house arrest as evidence of their illegal activities was broadcast on national television. Emily finally felt she was regaining control of her life, and with Ethan's support, she remained resolute in her goals of starting anew. Despite the losses, she knew her struggle was nearing its end. Justice was beginning to take shape, but Emily knew Jack and Lucas still had cards up their sleeves. She prepared herself for a final confrontation, aware that she'd face one last challenge before finally freeing herself from this dark past. With the allegations reverberating nationally, Emily and Ethan decided to stay in a secure location while monitoring the progress of the investigations. The media covered the story intensively, and once untouchable names from New Orleans elite now headlined news reports, being investigated by the police and press. Jack and Lucas were among the accused, but the sense of danger still loomed. Emily knew the exposure had only intensified Jack and Lucas's hatred for her. One afternoon, while Ethan was watching the news, he noticed that the police had scheduled a press conference to discuss the investigation's next steps. Both watched with anticipation, but they were shocked to learn that Jack had been released on bail, proclaiming his innocence and claiming to be a victim of circumstance. Lucas, on the other hand, had disappeared. His absence, however, was even more unsettling. Emily felt a heavy sense of fear, realizing he was likely lurking, waiting for an opportunity to strike. In the days that followed, Emily noticed a black car parked near their hideout, disappearing whenever she and Ethan were out of sight. Feeling watched, she became even more cautious, limiting her movements. One night, the phone rang, and when she answered, she heard Jack's cold voice threatening that if she didn't stop with the accusations, there would be severe consequences. He hinted that he knew her location and could reach her at any moment. Desperate, Emily discussed the next steps with Ethan. Running seemed like a temporary solution, but they needed a definitive strategy. Ethan suggested releasing even more evidence, revealing a full list of Jack and Lucas's criminal activities to the media. They decided this would be the only way to keep the pressure on them. Ethan also contacted a lawyer specializing in cases of threats and stalking, and together they devised a plan to protect themselves. But as night fell, Emily felt she was entering uncharted territory, where every move could be fatal. The tension between her and Jack was intensifying, and she knew he wouldn't stop until he saw her silenced. The next morning, Emily and Ethan prepared for a meeting with the lawyer, hoping he could help reinforce their legal protection against Jack. However, upon arriving at the office, they realized someone had already been there. The documents they had left with the lawyer were gone, and a threatening note lay on the desk. "There's no safe place for you, Emily. This confirmed that Jack or Lucas knew every move they were making and were ready to act. Ethan suggested they leave immediately, but Emily hesitated to leave the case in others' hands. However, the fear for their safety prevailed. They decided to get out of the city and find a place where they could reassess their options without danger. During the drive, Emily thought about how Jack and Lucas were always one step ahead, and the weight of past betrayals was becoming unbearable. As they traveled down a deserted road, Emily noticed a car following them from a distance. She alerted Ethan, and they sped up, trying to lose the pursuer. Fear was present with every turn, and just as they thought they were safe, the car closed in. Desperate, Ethan took a detour that led them to an isolated area. But the tension only grew, and they knew that at any moment, they could be attacked. When they finally stopped in a safe spot, far from the suspicious car, they decided to seek help from Leo, Ethan's hacker friend. Leo suggested they set a digital trap, monitoring Jack and Lucas's next moves through their cell phones if they could access their networks. It was a risky plan, but their only chance to learn what their enemies were plotting. As night fell, and though exhausted, Emily and Ethan spent the night organizing the digital trap. It was time to turn the tables, but they knew that any misstep could be fatal. With Leo's help, Emily and Ethan set up a digital trap to monitor Jack and Lucas's messages and calls. The goal was to anticipate their next moves and prevent them from getting close without being noticed. Leo assured them that the system was secure, but warned that they would need to act quickly, as the surveillance would only last a few hours before someone detected the intrusion. Upon activating the system, they intercepted messages from Lucas to an associate, detailing plans to ambush Emily and Ethan at their current hideout. The attack was scheduled for that night. Knowing time was against them, Ethan suggested setting up a fake scenario to distract Lucas and lure Jack away. Emily sent a message to a trusted police contact, reporting that she felt endangered and provided a nearby but safe address. This way, if Lucas tried to attack them, he would be surprised by a police team, ensuring his capture. By sharing the location with Jack, she knew the plan was in motion. However, as the time for the ambush approached, Emily began to fear that something might go wrong. If Jack uncovered the trap, he could escape. Ethan reassured her that they were prepared for any outcome, but she still felt the weight of uncertainty. That night represented a unique chance to end the chase. With the plan underway, they waited tensely, tracking each move Jack and Lucas made, hoping for the best but bracing for the worst. The ambush was ready, and Ethan and Emily observed every detail as they waited. But just before the scheduled time, they received a message from Leo. Lucas had discovered the digital trap and disappeared. He warned that Lucas was likely on high alert and might seek revenge, but his whereabouts were unknown. The risk was now even greater, as Lucas knew they were trying to capture him. With the plan disrupted, Emily and Ethan decided to return to their hideout, anxiously awaiting Jack's next move. The tension was unbearable, and the fear that Lucas was closer than they thought made Emily's heart race. When they arrived, they found that someone had broken in and left a message painted on the wall. "Don't hide, Emily. I'm coming." This made it clear that Lucas had not only escaped the trap, but knew exactly where to find them. The situation was out of control, and Emily realized they needed to prepare for a direct confrontation. Ethan suggested they catch a flight to a distant city, but Emily refused. She was determined to face Lucas and Jack head-on and put an end to this nightmare. They decided to make one last move. In an attempt to divert Jack and Lucas's attention, they spread rumors among trusted contacts, suggesting they had fled to another state. This would buy them time to prepare for a definitive meeting with the authorities. It was their last chance to survive and defeat their pursuers. Emily knew that when morning came, they would be one step closer to the end, but the weight of threats and vengeance still loomed over them. The morning brought a new wave of tension. Aware that they were being watched, Emily and Ethan acted as if they were heading to another location, fooling Jack and Lucas. However, instead of actually fleeing, they made their way to the final meeting spot with the authorities, armed with all the evidence they had gathered and ready to face whatever came. They planned to meet with an official from the Financial Crimes Division, who, they hoped, could dismantle the criminal scheme. Along the way, Emily reflected on the emotional and perilous roller coaster she had been on since arriving in New Orleans. Her thoughts were interrupted when she noticed a car following them closely. It was Jack, who had already discovered their movements and uncovered their last play. Ethan looked at her, both of them knowing they had to move forward, even with Jack on their tail. Upon arrival, they stepped out of the car, but Jack and his men appeared quickly, blocking the exit. Jack got out with a cold smile on his face, while Lucas appeared behind him, cornering them. The final showdown was about to begin, and Emily felt the weight of every decision that had brought her here. Jack approached, insinuating that nothing could save her now, while Lucas simply watched, as if waiting for the outcome. In a swift move, Ethan distracted the henchman while Emily faced Jack directly. But just when it seemed they would be captured, the police arrived, breaking up the scene and arresting Jack and Lucas. Finally, the web of lies was unraveling, and the investigations would lead to punishment for everyone involved. Exhausted but relieved, Emily and Ethan felt they were finally free. Despite the pain and scars, they knew they could start over, leaving behind the dark past and building a future where they could finally live in peace. With Jack and Lucas finally behind bars, Emily and Ethan experienced a brief moment of relief. However, the sense of security was short-lived. In the following days, Emily noticed that Jack had allies outside prison and that his influence was still a threat. Mysterious messages began appearing on Ethan's phone, and cryptic emails arrived in Emily's inbox. They knew someone was trying to intimidate them, indicating that Jack's criminal network might still be active. Determined to close the case once and for all, they both devoted themselves to aiding the investigation. Emily provided detailed statements, revealing the threats and Jack and Lucas's dark past. Meanwhile, Ethan uncovered additional evidence, documents exposing illegal transactions carried out by Jack's associates. The more they investigated, the clearer it became that the corruption network was vast, with Jack's connections extending beyond New Orleans to powerful figures in other cities. During one of these investigation sessions, they received news that Lucas had secured a parole hearing, claiming he had been manipulated by Jack and expressing remorse. Emily's heart raced at the news, knowing that Lucas's release would bring new complications and the possibility of revenge. Ethan, sensing her worry, reassured her that they were ready for any retaliation attempt. To ensure Lucas couldn't escape justice, Emily and Ethan shared new details with the prosecutor, further compromising Lucas's position. In response, Lucas began sending letters to Emily, claiming everything he had done was out of love. She knew these were desperate manipulation attempts, but felt this signaled he was on the verge of doing something unthinkable. On the night they awaited the decision on Lucas, Emily received one last message. "See you soon, Emily. Be ready." It was clear that Lucas was still playing his game and that the battle was far from over. The next morning, upon learning that Lucas had been released, Emily and Ethan remained on high alert. They knew he wouldn't hesitate to resume his campaign of intimidation. To their surprise, Lucas sent an invitation for dinner, requesting a meeting at an isolated location, saying he wanted to settle things and bring it all to an end. The message conveyed a tone of both threat and plea, as though it were a farewell. Ethan wanted her to refuse, but Emily felt that this encounter was necessary to close the chapter. Cautiously, they decided to go, but with a plan in mind. The police would follow from a distance to ensure their safety. That night, they headed to the appointed location, a secluded, nearly empty restaurant. Lucas was waiting for them, visibly disturbed, his gaze shifting between anger and sadness. Lucas began by admitting that he would never walk away from Emily. He claimed he felt wronged, that he had done everything to protect her, and that he had been betrayed in return. Emily listened silently, understanding that he didn't see himself as guilty and that his obsession had only grown. Realizing Lucas would never acknowledge his faults, she finally told him that she was no longer afraid. With Ethan by her side, they made it clear that they would not give in to blackmail or threats. As the conversation grew heated, Lucas realized he had lost control. He tried to twist the situation, saying she was making a mistake, but the police intervened before anything worse could happen. Lucas was taken back into custody, and this time he seemed to accept that the game was over. Emily and Ethan knew the battle was finally coming to an end, but just when they thought it was resolved, they discovered that Lucas possessed confidential information that could jeopardize the police's allies, once again endangering Emily's safety. After the new confrontation with Lucas, Emily and Ethan felt the weight of the secret he still held. A lawyer informed them that Lucas had been transferred to a less secure prison, where he had more access to other inmates and could continue to influence people on the outside. This information brought to light a final fear. Lucas still had powerful allies who could act on his behalf. Both felt the pressure that the situation was still not fully under control. To protect themselves, Emily and Ethan intensified their cooperation with the police. They revealed every detail they had, ensuring that any act of revenge from Lucas would be known. However, the prosecutor revealed a twist. Lucas was part of a circle of influential people and was negotiating information in exchange for protection, information that could shake the judicial system. With this revelation, Emily realized that the integrity of the police itself might be at risk and that Lucas was willing to betray anyone to escape. Ethan warned her that if Lucas gained protection, the chances of retaliation against them would increase. Together, they gathered additional documents, accounts from past victims, and a list of evidence proving that Lucas's freedom posed a public threat. Despite their efforts, external pressure was intense. Influential people began to emerge, attempting to persuade Emily and Ethan to withdraw their charges. Both refused, making it clear they would rather face the danger than allow Lucas to continue threatening them. Confronting the prosecutor, they insisted that Lucas remain incarcerated, and for the first time, the possibility of a definitive conviction emerged. At that moment, they realized they had a real chance to end the threat, but they would need to remain vigilant until the trial concluded. As Lucas's trial date approached, the tension was palpable. Ethan and Emily prepared to testify, knowing the threats hadn't ceased and that Lucas's influence was still strong. Days before the hearing, Emily noticed she was being followed, and anonymous phone calls resumed. She knew the game was nearing its end and that Lucas's final attempt would be to silence her before the trial. To protect themselves, they temporarily moved to a hotel under police guard, continuing to monitor every suspicious movement. During a routine check in one of the hotel rooms, they found an envelope with a final letter from Lucas, where he professed regret and said he loved her, asking for forgiveness. Emily, however, knew the letter's tone was manipulative and that the apologies were merely an attempt to sow doubt. On the day of the trial, Emily and Ethan arrived at the courthouse under heavy protection. The atmosphere was tense, and journalists covered every detail of the case, revealing Lucas's involvement in multiple crimes and exposing the corruption network he had helped maintain. When Emily was called to testify, she felt that every word was a direct blow to Lucas, who, even from afar, kept his eyes fixed on her. Lucas tried to discredit her, but the evidence was irrefutable. Ethan also testified, presenting documents and recordings that confirmed the threats and emphasized the danger Lucas posed. Lucas's defense argued that he was merely a pawn used by the true heads of the network, but the court was already convinced. At the end of the trial, the verdict was delivered. Lucas would be convicted, and his influence would finally be extinguished. Emily felt a weight lifted, a sense of relief and victory, but she knew the peace she sought was still beyond the courthouse walls. With Lucas's conviction, Emily and Ethan felt they could finally start rebuilding their lives. New Orleans, once marked by fear and danger, seemed to have a new light for them. Local authorities conducted arrests of prominent figures linked to Jack and Lucas's corruption network, dismantling the web that had threatened so many lives. For the first time in months, Emily felt that freedom was not just a possibility. It was a reality. To mark the end of this dark chapter, Emily and Ethan decided to temporarily distance themselves, seeking a quiet town to reflect on everything they had been through. During this pause, Ethan expressed his affection for Emily, and she, for the first time, allowed herself to fully reciprocate. They knew that what they shared was more than a connection forged by survival. It was a genuine partnership built on trust and resilience. As they prepared to return to New Orleans, they were contacted by Leo, the hacker, who informed them that with Lucas's imprisonment and the fall of the network, many victims had been able to rebuild their lives, freed from blackmail. Emily felt at peace, knowing that the justice she had sought impacted the lives of so many others. The city was finally free from the dark control that had loomed over it. Upon their return, they set out to build a new story together. Emily resumed her old job, feeling grateful for the future that awaited her. Ethan, now her inseparable companion and friend, stood by her side for whatever lay ahead. And as they walked through the streets of New Orleans under the gentle evening light, they knew that the past had finally been laid to rest. Emily, now safe and at peace, mentally thanked the strength that had carried her through. She felt ready for the future, confident that what she and Ethan would build together would be based on truth and love, vastly different from the past she had once shared with Jack and Lucas. With Lucas and his corruption network dismantled, Emily and Ethan were ready to move forward, though the shadow of the past lingered. Memories of the turbulent months they had survived surfaced in quiet moments, reminding them they had endured something few could understand. For Emily, the strength she'd found in facing Jack, Lucas, and even her own fears was something she'd never imagined possessing. Determined to leave the dark memories behind, Emily began seeking new opportunities in New Orleans. However, one question still haunted her. Could Lucas's powerful alliances resurface to threaten her again? Sensing her concern, Ethan suggested they meet with Leo, the hacker, to monitor any suspicious activity surrounding Lucas's former allies. During their meeting, Leo assured them that Lucas had lost all support from his former partners. They only backed him while he was in power. Without influence, he's just another prisoner, Leo explained, giving them the reassurance that, at least regarding immediate danger, they were finally safe. Emily felt a mix of relief and gratitude, realizing that the nightmare was truly ending. With this newfound freedom, she and Ethan began making plans for the future. They reflected on what they wanted for themselves and discovered that New Orleans, despite its memories, had become a home where they'd been reborn. They decided to build a new life together, surrounded by those who had helped them through the darkest times and fueled by hope for brighter days. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt at peace. Her journey had been arduous and filled with challenges, but she knew that, with Ethan by her side, she could move forward. The life that once seemed confined by shadows now unfolded before them, full of promise. After all they had faced, Emily and Ethan dedicated themselves to rebuilding their lives with renewed intensity. The time they had spent away from the city had given them fresh perspectives, and both resolved to savor every moment of freedom. Together, they visited places they'd once feared to explore, rediscovering the charm and beauty of New Orleans, now free from any apprehension. The city that once symbolized a heavy, dark past had become a beacon of new beginnings. Emily found a new job, and Ethan began working as a consultant at a private security agency. Engaging in investigations and protecting victims of abuse and intimidation, he felt he was giving back the safety he had once lost. Both found a new purpose in helping others escape threats similar to those they had faced. The journey, once a struggle for survival, had transformed into a calling to aid others. One day, Emily reconnected with Jane, her neighbor who had been there for her from the beginning. Jane, who had also faced fears and secrets, was delighted to see that Emily was doing well. The two friends spent an entire afternoon talking, and Emily realized that, despite the hardships, She had found people who would always support her. While they strolled through the city, Ethan surprised Emily with a proposal for a trip together, not just to rest, but to begin a new chapter. She smiled, accepting the idea, knowing it represented a journey to explore not only new places but also new possibilities for the future. More than ever, they were ready to embrace life and leave the shadows behind. That night, as they made plans, Ethan noticed something important. The fear he once felt was gone. He and Emily had overcome what once seemed impossible, and now, as they looked toward the horizon, they saw only possibilities. As life gradually returned to normal, Emily and Ethan began planning a future together. The intense experiences they had shared strengthened their bond, and each moment with him felt like part of a new and joyful phase. For Emily, the love she felt for Ethan was more than just passion. It was a conscious choice and a product of a trust that had become unbreakable. He supported her, and together, they believed they could build something solid and real. Yet, as her feelings became clearer than ever, Emily felt old insecurities resurface. She wondered if she truly deserved this love after everything she had been through, and if a relationship forged through such trials could truly withstand the test of time. Noticing the concern in her gaze, Ethan comforted her. He reassured her that their shared struggles were not a weakness but the foundation of a strong and enduring relationship. The following week, Ethan planned a surprise for Emily. Dinner at a restaurant he knew was special to her. During the evening, he proposed, revealing that he was ready for a commitment he never imagined wanting again. For Ethan, Emily was the love he had rediscovered after years of disappointment, and he was determined to build a life with her. With tears of joy, Emily accepted. In that moment, she felt her heart was finally whole. There, in that restaurant, under the gentle lighting and with promises of the future, she realized that every pain and struggle had led her to this point, where she was ready to be truly happy. For both, this decision reaffirmed what they already knew. They were prepared for a new chapter, one no longer defined by the past, but by what they would build together. As the wedding approached, Emily and Ethan immersed themselves in the preparations, confident that they were entering the most meaningful phase of their lives. The ceremony would be simple and intimate, with those who had been part of their journey of resilience. Leo, Jane, and some of the police officers who had helped them along the way were invited, creating an atmosphere of gratitude and unity. On the day of the wedding, New Orleans was radiant, with sunshine and a gentle breeze carrying the freshness of a new beginning. Emily walked down the aisle to meet Ethan, and as they exchanged vows, both were moved as they recalled the obstacles they had overcome. They promised to love and protect each other, certain that no challenge could shake what they had built together. After the ceremony, friends and family congratulated them, and the reception was filled with joy and smiles. During his speech, Ethan expressed his love and admiration for Emily, highlighting how much she inspired him to be a better person. Emily, emotional, responded with heartfelt words, speaking of the unconditional support and courage he had brought into her life. As the day drew to a close and they walked through a garden illuminated by candles, they both felt that the darkness was finally behind them. They were ready to move forward, united by a love that had triumphed over every adversity and now symbolized a new phase full of hope. Looking to the future, they knew they would still face challenges, but they trusted that together, they could overcome anything, as they always had. With marriage and a new home in New Orleans, Emily and Ethan dedicated themselves to living fully, each day strengthened by the love that had united them. Their past experiences taught them to cherish simplicity, and their shared life was marked by moments of peace and gratitude. The city, once a setting of challenges and fear, was now their safe haven, a home where they could be completely happy. In the following months, Ethan continued his work as a security consultant, while Emily found fulfillment in her new career. Together, they helped others overcome hardships, using their own experiences as inspiration. They became a model for friends and acquaintances, who admired the strength and resilience they displayed in every situation. One day, while walking through the park, Emily confided to Ethan that despite all the pain of the past, she felt grateful for the journey she had lived. He embraced her, reaffirming that, despite the difficulties, they were exactly where they were meant to be. They knew life would still bring surprises, but both felt ready to face them, confident that what they had built was strong enough to withstand time and adversity. As the years went by, Emily and Ethan created new memories in every corner of New Orleans. Every cafe, street, and sunset reminded them of the battles they had won and the dreams they chose to build together. And with each shared moment, they felt more united, certain that their love was their greatest achievement. That evening, as they watched the city lights, Ethan held Emily's hand and kissed it, saying that for him, every day by her side was a new beginning. With a serene smile, Emily knew she had found the peace she had long sought, and that alongside Ethan, she would live an eternal beginning filled with love and happiness. Emily looked out over the city's horizon beside Ethan, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The battle against Jack, Lucas, and the powerful Blakely was over, yet the journey had left deep marks on her heart. She could still feel the weight of the choices she had made, the ties she had to sever, and the sacrifice Lucas had paid, the ultimate price so they could all move forward. New Orleans, the city that had once been the stage of her worst nightmares, now symbolized both redemption and a new start. Each step along the way had revealed pieces of true courage and friendship, and Emily knew that without Ethan by her side, the story would have ended very differently. They had faced a web of betrayal and corruption, survived threats, and dismantled an empire of lies. Now, among the lights shining across the streets of New Orleans, Emily knew she was finally free to live, love, and start anew without the shadows that had haunted her for so long. Ethan held her hand with a firm grip, a signal that the support and bond between them would continue to be the foundation of their new life. Emily felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love, knowing they were stronger together. They had not only exposed the criminals but had freed themselves from the secrets that once held them captive. Now, she was ready to move forward, transforming the traumas of the past into new memories of hope and freedom. If you enjoyed this story full of twists and emotion, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss other amazing narratives like this. Keep following along and discover how stories of overcoming, love, and forgiveness can inspire change in our lives.